Thank you very much. It's been an early morning for me. I was up at 1:30 West Coast time to catch a flight here. That's not the worst of it. I got told Wednesday night by my boss that I have a presentation to do today on Watson Health. I said, great, where are the slides? Slides? I don't have any slides. Okay, what am I supposed to present on? I don't know, you'll figure it out. So here I am. My name is Jeff Beeler. I'm the Vice President of Product Innovation, and I have worked for Merge for a year. We were purchased last fall by IBM in one of IBM's many acquisitions. One of the cool things about it is that Merge, as a company, has a lot of digital imaging and digital imaging properties. And I'll talk a little bit more, quite a bit more actually, about that a little bit later. But that's the main reason that we were purchased by IBM. So a little bit about my background, and part of the reason that I didn't say no, give it to somebody else. I spent the last 15 years in the pharmaceutical and CRO industry, the last 8 years specifically at a pharmaceutical company. So 8 years have gone by. We did 8 NDA SNDAs, and we received 8 approvals. Now, in that period of time, that's a pretty good track record. A lot of people never get one NDA submitted, much less approved. So we were a specialty GI company, and I'm going to go into a little bit more of that in some of the examples that I use. But I want you to know that I'm coming more from your world than my world, as hard as that probably is to believe from you. Okay, go ahead with the first slide. Here we go. So a lot of people say, are you really committed to healthcare? If you're committed to healthcare, how can you really tell? So in 2015, our CEO said, I'm telling you, our moonshot will be the impact we have on healthcare. It's already started. We will change and do our part to change the face of healthcare. I'm absolutely positive about it. And that, to me, while we do many other things, that will be one of the most important. Now, you can talk about healthcare and how you're committed and all these other things, but as the old saying goes, put your money where your mouth is. As you can see from the numbers at the bottom, $4 billion has been allocated just to cognitive health care. $3 billion to the Internet of Things, $8 billion to the cloud, and $26 billion to big data and analytics. To me, that's not just saying we're committed to health care, that's putting your money where your mouth is. When we talk about cognitive learning, a lot of people see it as artificial intelligence, robots are going to take over the world, Terminator 2 down the road in Los Angeles, all the great things with Cyberdyne, right? So there have actually been 3 different eras of computing. The first era was really the tabulating systems era. It started in the early 19th century and it went through the early 1940s. And the purpose of the tabulating area was to make lives simpler. So the mechanical devices that were created used to organize data and make certain calculations. Then we get to the programmable era. And it was interesting to hear someone on the panel say, computers are very good at certain tasks. They are fed data. They give you an answer. It's always the same answer. It's always right if it was programmed correctly. And it gives you the same answer every single time. So with that in mind, in the programmable era, it was traditional computer systems, just like we use today. They're programmed code. You use the code over and over and over again. It gives you the same answer over and over and over again. In order to change that answer, you have to go in, change the code, reallocate it to a production system. It gives you a precise answer. It's a yes or a no, or a number, or a calculation, or some other factor. You can scale the system up, you can scale the system down. We're getting now into a cognitive era, and cognitive computing is really cool. A lot of people say it's machine learning, right? Their systems are machine learning. Well, in order to actually do machine learning, you have to be able to take a step back, and the machine does figure things out. It helps us make better decisions. It doesn't make the decision for us. It gives us a hypothesis, not an answer, not a Boolean answer. It draws insights from your data. Therefore, you've got to have data to feed into it, and a lot of data to feed into it. The systems continuously reprogram themselves. So as more information comes in, the programming and the answers and hypotheses that it gives you in the end actually changes, which to me is phenomenal. These are automated systems with workload management built in. They take care of themselves. They scale up and they scale down for themselves. So in this era, we basically have 3 different shifts in the market that have to occur in order for this to happen. The first, data becomes our natural resource. So without data, you don't have a cognitive system because it's built on learning from the data that resides there. The second is the emergence of cloud technologies actually makes it much easier because now you can centralize your data. You have all your data in one place that you can access from virtually anywhere in the world and definitely anywhere that you have internet access. Personal data, a lot of people are really afraid to give away their personal data until you talk about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of the other social media, LinkedIn. All of these types of social media, people freely give their information away. As a matter of fact, they give a lot more information away than I want to see or I want to read, especially in the political year. So as you create this, you also create a need for security, you create a need for trust, but you also give some value back. So what our point of view is on these particular items, right? The first is data is really the basis of cognitive learning. We need to learn how much data we can store, how much data we can gather together. For the cloud, it is the pathway to new business models. Software as a service, SaaS, S-A-A-S, not S-A-S, as in SaaS programming, right? So you hear that all the time, software as a service, software as a service. It has become really the norm in most cases. Systematic approach to engagement is also required, right? So as you go into, how many places do you see, log in with your Facebook account, log in with your G+ account, log in with your LinkedIn account. Lots of different places that you can do that. So who is Watson? How many of you have heard of Watson? Lots, right? What do you know him for? Jeopardy, right. I asked people this morning on the plane, I said, what are you going to San Francisco for? I said, to talk about Watson. They said, he did Jeopardy, right? Talked to the cab driver on the way over here. Oh yeah, he did Jeopardy, right? Yes, he did Jeopardy. That's exactly right. But he does a lot of other things, right? So this is where I had my slide with the computer and the bot and the person and all that stuff, and IBM Legal made me take it out. Because it isn't just artificial intelligence that we're talking about, right? My slide, okay. Watson actually understands, okay? The big thing about Watson is you don't have to tell him if A equals B, then do, right? He can analyze the meaning and the context of data. So if you have natural language data, you have an AE form, an SAE form, you've got medical history, he can ingest that and interpret it. If you say a subject presented 3 weeks ago with an MI, and they're now put on a beta blocker, Watson knows, beta blocker, I know exactly what that is. It's a concomitant medication. 3 weeks ago, that means it's medical history. Stores it as the patient's medical history. It was a cardiac event, right? So these 3 things, Watson actually can pull from natural language data and store it accordingly and make calculations upon that data. Watson actually reasons, right? Fed a lot of data. He searches and analyzes the data. He returns evidence-based recommendation or hypothesis. He doesn't give you a right and wrong answer. It's all evidence-based. He learns. Decisions made by leading experts feed this engine. So you can't just give Watson a bunch of information. You also have to teach him how to use the information. We've partnered with some of the best oncologists in the world. We've partnered with a lot of physicians in the world to teach him about oncology, which is truly amazing, especially for those in stage 3, stage 4, right? Watson learns and actually improves himself over time. He improves the answers. He improves the percentages he gives. And if something is found to change, to go in the other direction, he'll actually change the recommendation as he goes along. So Watson working, right? He ingests data. So first you have to teach Watson the subject. Related materials are loaded into Watson. They can be Word documents, they can be PDF documents, they can be web pages, and they can be images. And the reason that I say images, that's really important. When you get into medical device world, you get into the pharmaceutical world. I came from the GI world, like I said. One of the things that we came into an issue with is we started a Crohn's disease study. We wrote the protocol, got everything ready to go, and what happened? FDA comes back and says, oh, CDAI is no longer the only way that you measure Crohn's. Well, how else do you measure it? Oh, we need an endoscopic endpoint. Oh, endoscopic. All right, we can do an endoscopic endpoint. Then we started asking ourselves questions. Do they want a single read? Do they want 2 reads? Do they want adjudicated reads? Do they want 3 reads? How many reads do they want? It was never stated. So we had to start asking those questions for ourselves. Watson reading images is extremely important in that arena because Watson can do it, and Watson can make objective decisions on the same images that a human may make subjective decisions on. As Watson goes along, then he starts answering questions because we start asking him questions, right? We want the information that he's giving us back. Watson searches millions and millions of documents and gives the possibility of thousands of answers. He collects evidence. He uses it and scores it based on the quality of that evidence. Ranks all the possible answers and outcomes and the score supporting that particular evidence. So Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Watson have teamed up, and you can go on the web and find a video about this. Watson for Oncology is intended to assist oncologists in selecting treatment options for cancer patients. It helps oncologists by providing them with evidence-based treatments and giving them access to the information based on the patient's clinical attributes. So it actually looks at the information that the patient has. It looks at their medical history. It looks at their labs. It looks at what procedures have been done before, what medications have been used before. Watson for Oncology utilizes IBM's subject-neutral Watson technology platform with an oncological subject matter expertise embodied in Watson for Oncology, coming from collaboration with the world's leading oncologists. And like I said, Memorial Sloan Kettering is about as good as you get, right? So now how does Watson, backwards, let's go forward. All right, so this is what probably a lot of you are really interested in, and this starts talking into the clinical trial world, right? So if you've ever written a protocol, you know that that final protocol is final about 25 times before there's ever a word final put on it, and then it's final 25 more. At least it was where I worked, okay? So as you begin to think about a synopsis of a protocol, and you start putting these things together, you pass it off to FDA and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? Oh, it sounds great. So then you go and you start actually developing a final protocol. Now you get your final protocol. And before you're done, you actually realize you need an amendment, right? Because, oops, we forgot about this. Or now we've done our research and there aren't enough patients with this particular inclusion criteria or too many have an exclusion criteria, right? So then you've got to go with an amendment because your study's not enrolling. Site selection, okay, it also becomes really critical. It's one of the things that's extremely difficult, extremely expensive. And only about 50%, at least in my experience, of sites actually enrolled even one subject. So you've sunk all of that cost into 50% of your other sites. And as you're paying those sites for their site initiation visits, for all of their documentation, for the regulatory, all of those types of things, you have wasted that money on that 50% of your sites. And study costs are directly affected by the amendments and the weak site selection. It's just, part of the way it works. A lot of people say, well, it can't be avoided. Sure it can. Because Watson can help provide protocol optimization based on the patient population. You can do this now, okay? It utilizes structured and unstructured patient data, so he can read doctor's notes, he can read medical history, he can read any types of adverse event, he could read pharmacy data even, if it were supplied. It can also help increase the speed to market. And if you're under a patent, you know how important that speed to market is. 6 months may mean a lot of money on a drug. So imaging in healthcare and clinical trials both, IBM Watson Health is actually developing these types of capabilities. And like I talked about earlier, what if Watson could do the first pass of an image and give you a recommendation and say, I'm 97% confident that XYZ is your answer? Then the second read could be performed by a trained person doing a read, CT scan or video or whatever the case may be. If he agrees, great. Watson says, hey, I got it right. I'm going to increase because I know that this was a correct read. Or if the person coming in says, wait a minute, this is wrong and here's why it's wrong. Watson now goes back and says, yes, the next time I see this, I know it's not a score of 6, it's a score of 5. And here are the reasons why. So objectively, Watson can make that decision the next time he sees the exact same image. If you give a reader 2 exact same images or 2 exact same videos, through their training, they should be able to score them the same every time. Watson will score them the same every time, assuming that the data behind the image read has not changed. Because if it has changed, he will also change. Again, it's objective measures, final reads by human. What if Watson learns from these past images? What if you can do away with adjudication in many cases? If you have a device and you're doing a scan on it after it's been implanted to ensure that it doesn't move as part of a clinical trial, if you can accurately measure with Watson, accurately measure with someone else, you're done. There's no more need for adjudication. So if you're doing a Crohn's study and you're doing a colonoscopy and you're doing this endoscopic read and you give them a score, Watson's going to score it the same every time. What if you could do away with adjudication? What if you could do away with reader fatigue? If you're sitting watching video or looking at images hour upon hour upon hour, what happens if the size of your monitor changes? What happens if the resolution of your monitor changes? What if you end up with a 480p image instead of a 1080p image? What happens in these cases, right? So all of the human elements that come into play, Watson's still ones and zeros. It always looks the same to him. There are also a lot of challenges in this arena, right? So you need a team of experts and really, really good experts in the field. You need key opinion leaders. You need worldwide leaders in the space. It's obviously expensive, but doing it once, again, helps to train Watson to do his job correctly the first time and give the proper hypothesis every time. The data comes in various forms. Like I said, it could be handwritten notes, it could be scanned data, it could be PDF documents, it could be a lot of things. But Watson understands natural language and can actually read the natural language to make this happen. And can I get enough data? How many images read by Watson is enough? How many do you train a human with? 50? 20? 100? What's the proper number for Watson? Because Watson doesn't get tired of doing it. He can read gigabytes, terabytes, and petabytes of data in a day. No human can do that. So now I want you to think for a second, okay? So if you think about the way that we do medicine today, you go to the doctor, you have an ailment, right? He knows your demographics, he knows all the information about you, he knows you personally, right? He prescribes a drug that he thinks is going to work for you, okay? But what if you had the opportunity for him to go in and say, oh, let me put in your demographics. Okay, 45 to 50 years old, white, non-Hispanic, Euro descent. Let's see. What other things do we know about you? Oh, we know your medical history. Input the medical history. Okay, we've got medical history there. Oh, you had an adverse event with this particular drug. What happens if somebody else has that particular adverse event? So what we can do is we can actually grab this data and compile it and say, what have patients like Jeff Beeler experienced with a drug? What has been efficacious? What has not been? Let's see what the hypothesis is that a particular drug will work. If I go to the doctor and I can get a drug that I'm pretty sure is going to work 97% of the time, I'd much rather have that than the 40% that happened in a clinical trial. only 15% of patients even know that clinical trials are available. So what if we look at this from a perspective that a patient goes in and they're seeking treatment, and a doctor doesn't know about a particular clinical trial? Load Watson with all of the clinical trial information from clinicaltrials.gov. Now Watson has that information. He knows all the inclusion criteria, knows the exclusion criteria. A patient now is 16 years old. Oh, they don't meet these particular trials. But we do have some pediatric trials that they meet. Goes through the other inclusion, exclusion. They have to have regular visits, all these other things that can be taken into account as you start looking for clinical trials for a subject. Now think about the converse of that, right? The converse of that is, where do my sites need to be? Big question, right? Where do my sites need to be? Where are the clusters of patients that would participate in my trial? So now you feed Watson the opposite information. You say, okay, I know I have a protocol. Now what subjects actually meet my inclusion criteria? Where are they? What subjects don't meet exclusion criteria? Where are they? It starts clustering these subjects into areas. Now you can go to the places that your sites that you probably already use and have used for years and trust, and you can bring those sites into that particular clinical trial and enroll your trial much quicker and much more effective. You can reduce your screen fail rate. You can reduce all of the costly things from the clinical trial from that point forward. And that is all I have.
Hi, my name is Noah Gershon, and I'm from Lex Research. And I actually recently listened to another talk by a guy from IBM Watson, and he mentioned that one of the problems with Watson is that while it can do very impressive analytics, it cannot differentiate between good data and bad data. And so my question for you is, can you envision a future where Watson can overcome that pain point and where it can not only recommend, but also make decisions instead of doctors?
So good data, bad data, garbage in, garbage out, right? That's kind of the data mantra, right? So the way that you would tell Watson is you simply retrain him. And if there are bad data, you go and make sure that that data is removed, right? Because if you don't just ingest Watson with things off the web that, my sister Sally posted on the web to her Instagram the other day saying that some drug gave her, an ischemic event, right? You actually have to go and utilize data that is from a medical record or from a published white paper that's been peer-reviewed and those sorts of things. You don't just feed it any type of data. So again, the data input is obviously something that's very important. That's why training him with physicians that are world-leading physicians is extremely important, because if they know the right answer, they're going to give Watson the right answer. If they give Watson the wrong answer, Watson doesn't know if it's right or wrong. He just knows that they said that it was right, and that's the way he was trained. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I recently went to a presentation on big data by a company that has like hundreds of millions of lives in its data system. And one of the things they said that was very hard about analyzing this big data around medical lives was actually knowing what questions to ask the data. And I just wondered, and that's not meant to be a trick question, I'm interested to know some of the things that you're doing with Watson to try and sort of help mitigate that issue.
Sure. So Watson for Oncology is the first foray into that particular answering of the questions. The research in doing Watson for Oncology started about 2.5 years ago. And that is really the only therapeutic area that is very comfortable in this at this point. There's a lot of information that's been fed. And so you can't just take it and analyze it like you can in a normal statistical model, because in a normal statistical model, you're looking for the standard deviation, the mean, the median, and then whether or not it meets your p-value, right? So that's not the way that Watson works. It gives you a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is not right, it's not wrong. It's a best guess of what the correct answer is. And so when Watson is trained, that's the way he's trained. It is not just a pure big data analytics running statistics.